We are back. Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project. I'm Rob Kalvarowski, and as always, the yang to my yin is here, Susan Hobson. Susan, how are you?
I thought you were going to come in with bum, 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 bum.
Well, we are, for folks out there, we are unleashing the Coach's Corner as part of the Legacy League that's coming up in January. So
Yeah, we
as you're
are.
listening to this,
Can't wait.
probably about a week or two away from you listening to this, we're going to be launching our own leadership legacy community. And so stay tuned to all of our social for that. And we're going to have you in the locker room, and Susan will be playing the role of Don Cherry, where I will be the Ron McClane getting beat down as always.
I can't wait for us to mimic that dynamic, buddy. This is definitely top of the highlight reel for 24.
Absolutely. And so we always have to start this quote, show off with a quote. And so I have one here from trauma expert Peter Levine. And he says, trauma is hell on earth. Trauma resolved is a gift from the gods.
And tell us why you picked that before we introduce our guest today.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously for me and my own journey, it led me to some really deep depths of despair. And now living the life that I do is massively different and also a gift. And of course, we have hockey legend, Canadian icon, Stanley Cup winner, Olympic gold medalist, my favorite tournament, World Junior gold medalist, the co-host of We're All a Little Crazy podcast, author of Fire and Conversations with a Rattlesnake, Playing with Fire and Conversations of a Rattlesnake, and leading mental health, trauma, and motivational speaker, Theo Fleury is with us. Theo, how are you?
That's quite a mouthful, but yeah, happy to be here. And I always love talking about trauma. It's something that I've been a part of, pretty much since I left the game, and been doing this for about 16 years, trying to figure out this whole trauma riddle and this whole trauma puzzle. And it's probably been one of the greatest journeys I've ever been on. It's been incredibly rewarding. And, I've been able to help a lot of people come to grips with their own, experiences with trauma, I believe that trauma is at the core of every single issue we have in society. Starts with unresolved trauma, and then you sort of pick your poison because you're going on one hell of a roller coaster ride for the next 25 years of your life, trying to get to a place of peace, joy, happiness, and serenity, right? Because that's sort of the goal, if you would have told me, I don't know, 25 years ago when I was playing in the NHL, that this is what I would be doing post-hockey career, I would have said, you're nuts. But, like I said, it's been incredibly rewarding and, probably some of the best work I've ever done. So happy to be with both of you today.
I want to dig into this. I want to start off by just sharing a little personal story with you, because I don't think he realizes this, but you are a massive reason why I'm on this mic today. Back in the day when I was first recruited to go down to New England, one of the first waves of females offered a scholarship to one of them fancy prep schools in New England. It was my first year away, where I was the classic high achiever, right? Like pretending like it was all good on the outside and suppressing all my stress on the inside. And I was actually diagnosed with colitis my first year away at boarding school. And I remember the white lab coats coming into my hospital room telling me, no, you can't go back to school. You can't go fulfill your scholarship. And I actually went and found your case study back in the AOL dial-up internet days, and took it to my specialist and said, I'm going back. And so I just wanted to start off this conversation today with gratitude, because since that point, I mean, that was my first brick wall in terms of what I think was a traumatic experience, having to go back away from school or away from home at 14 years old with none of the tools, because Lord knows we don't get those tools in our sport, do we?
Oh, no. No.
And then on to the Ivy Leagues, where my father passed away my first year, which was my second trauma. And then that was when I was first even exposed to mental health being a thing. That was the first time I was ever brought down to a mental health center on my campus. And that's when I actually started to learn about what all that was probably coming from. Yeah. And that's what inspired me to start my process coming out those gates, because I really wanted to affect change in the grassroots. I thought it was ridiculous that it took me getting to the top 1% of my sport to even learn about my mindset and the role that my mental health was playing in my performance.
Right.
And so coming out of those gates, I created this process that Rob and I run now with high achievers who we believe all come from trauma. So my question for you, because this is still the biggest gap that I see in sports from a leadership perspective, why in 2023 are we still not learning about the role of mental health in high performance?
Well, that's a loaded question, it boggles my mind too, right? Because when you get to the highest levels, right, at that point, it's 5% ability, right? Yeah. And, the superstars and the great ones, 95% of what they do is mental, right? How they handle stress and how they handle pressure, all these things. And we have a gym for our body. Why don't we have a gym for our brain? You know what I mean? And they say we only actually use 10% of our whole entire brain. So can you imagine if you were, working on a 20 or 30% level, how much better you would be as as an athlete and whatnot. So yeah, it's really strange that there isn't an emphasis, but especially in hockey, you still have the majority of people who run the game are old school, right? So that suck it up era, right? There's a lot of those guys that are still around, running teams, or, our general managers, our presidents, and, unfortunately, they just don't think outside the box. They don't think that, your team's overall mental performance can lead to, more points on, in the standings, a better dressing room, like all the things they talk about, they just, they're so closed-minded when it comes to, the mental side, of the game. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's how I see it. But, let's face it, what made me great was, that 95%, because from a pure physics perspective, I'm not supposed to have success. I was 5'6", 150 pounds. And, when I broke in the league, the average height was 6 feet. The average weight was 200 pounds. So, I'm not supposed to have success. But, what made me successful was my mind and how I used it, on the playing field, and I realized early on, especially playing junior, that, probably 80 to 90% of the guys that I was playing against were all bluffers, right? and when I knew that you were a bluffer, I could pretty much do whatever I wanted on the ice, and I knew that I was never going to get any pushback because, as a smaller player who, had big skill and big talent, that can be easily neutralized, if I was afraid, right? And so I had to get room on the ice. And so how I got room on the ice was playing this psychological, game while within the game, right? And, also, I competed at the highest level too. Like I hated losing, like, and I was willing to die in order to win. And I knew that most guys I was playing against weren't going to go to that place. And if you didn't want to go to that place, then, I own you.
Theo, where does that mindset come from? Because we started with trauma as
Mhm.
being the thing, and you said you're
Yeah,
going
that's all
to
trauma.
die to win. And I actually have that same
We
piece.
recognize that mindset. That's
I
why we're
have
asking.
exactly
Yeah.
that same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, uh, there's a lot of anger there, right? And that's one of the remnants of trauma that leaves behind is you're angry, resentful, person, and that anger, saved my life,
Mhm.
and allowed me to be the successful professional hockey player that I was, and then, when I left the game, I'm like, holy cow, like I don't need to be this angry anymore, and realize that, what is under anger, sadness, right? And I never really uh, um, tapped into that piece, right? And I was so afraid of looking at the sadness because I thought, geez, if I start crying, I may never stop.
Mhm.
But what I realized was that, that's what heals anger is those tears and showing those, emotions. Because, let's face it, when you're playing in the NHL and the coach comes up to you at 6:30 and the game's at 7, and he goes, "Are you fucking ready?" And you say to him, "No, coach, I'm really sad tonight." He's going to put me on the ice? But you know what? There was a lot of nights that I felt that way, but what do? You just stuff and stuff and stuff, and then eventually, you have this massive explosion that happens inside of you, and that anger comes out, and who do you hurt? You hurt the people that you love the most, right? And you know, yeah, so yeah, it's been a journey, looking at anger, right? And, you know, I work in the prison system in Canada, and when I go in and work with inmates, all I see are sad little boys. I don't see murderers and rapists, and I just see sad little boys who have unresolved trauma, and nobody's really explained their anger to them in a way that they understand it. And it's really cool when you watch these big tough guys who have tattoos everywhere on their body. You get them to that place where they're showing that that emotion, and the relief that comes for them when you're doing that kind of work is pretty special.
How do we lead
Totally.
people to that work, Theo? Because this is the thing I also see in 2023 when mental
Mhm.
health is at the worst crisis point it's ever been at post-pandemic.
Yeah,
We're still not talking about trauma.
yeah.
So what is the pathway? Because we
Well,
see
they
this.
don't.
Yeah.
The bad guys don't want us talking about trauma, right? So that's probably the reason why we aren't talking about trauma, right? And um, yeah, it blows my mind because we're very aware that there's a mental health crisis. We're very aware that there's a addiction crisis, but we never acknowledge the catalyst which brings us into those two spaces, and that's trauma. That's unresolved trauma, right? And the media has a lot to do with that. The pharmaceutical industry has a lot to do with that, right? And yeah, so I've spent the last 16 years of my life, talking about trauma. And, and, it's as simple as, this little thing called vulnerability, and what is vulnerability? Vulnerability is storytelling. That's all it is, and by telling your story, you create a safe space and a safe environment. And once that safety, gets into a room, then these, tough, angry, toxic men, start to peel those layers of the onion off, and they get to that, they get to the core of, of why they do what they do. Right. And, yeah, it's unfortunate that, we don't talk about trauma enough, but, I've sort of made it my mission to, talk about it as much as possible, because I know, I know what emotional pain and is like, and it's ugly, it's ugly, and um, it prevents you from fulfilling, sort of your purpose on this planet, is, if you don't look at your trauma, you know, there's a lot of things that are going to go wrong in your life, and it's unfortunate, and we're seeing it being played out, every single day on the planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Theo, what would you say to those leaders or coaches that are those kind of old school mindsets, the stuff it down folks, about like now that you've gone from one end to the other end of the spectrum, like
Mhm.
how would you advise them to set up their teams or their folks?
Well, there's a little thing called godly masculinity, right? You know, and that spiritual piece is so lacking in society, right? And I'm still one of the toughest son of bitches that ever walked the face of the earth, but I can cry and I can be vulnerable. I still have that, you know, when I need it, right? Um, so yeah. And um yeah, that spiritual piece is such a huge part in all of this. Because if you don't have a spiritual base, you're never going to make it. It's just as simple as that, right? And whatever that is, that's up to you. I'm not talking religion. I'm talking just basic. Because to me, what is spirituality? Spirituality is relationship. That's what it is, right? And it's about, having a relationship with myself first, right? And the one relationship I neglected the most when I was struggling the most was the one I had with myself, right? Because when my abuser left my life, what happened? I took over the abuse and I abused myself, because that's all I thought, you know, that I was good for, right? And and then I started doing therapy, and I started, trying different things, and realized that um what I was lacking was that spiritual connection. And September September 17th, 2005, I hit my knees in a washroom and I surrendered, and I turned my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood him. And wow, it's been amazing since I did that, right?
Wow.
And a lot of people don't grasp on that concept, and those are the people that struggle the most. It's very simple, especially in the addiction space, right?
Yeah.
Came to believe that something or someone could restore me back to sanity, right? you know so yeah.
Where
I
does
know
that
we
role
want to
begin? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I know we want to dig deeper into self
Yeah.
relationship, but before you say that, I had a client actually say to me the other day, like, does this work make him or will it make him lose his edge? And I just wanted to echo what you said was, I'm still the toughest son of a bitch on the planet. Like, just break that down for folks out there.
Yeah. Well, you know, because I played a very physical, masculine sport, you know, obviously I needed that characteristic. And now that I don't play that game and, you know, I'm more in the, you know, empathy, compassion, forgiveness space, you know, I don't need that. Right. But, you know, I also have, you know, a set of boundaries that I never had before. You know, but like I said, when people cross the line, you know, they're going to see that, you know, that
Warrior.
you know what I mean? And, you know, if you look up the definition of warrior, you know, it's about vulnerability. It's about being able to cry, but also, you know, to stand up for what you believe in. Right. And, so yeah, I've been able to sort of navigate, you know, when I need that, you know, that tough guy in your face, person. But I would say the majority of the time I don't need it because I carry an energy where people know, you know, don't piss this guy off, right? You know, and that's all about, you know, raising your own personal vibration, right? And, you know, especially in this time that we're living in, you know, that's basically all I've been working on is meditating and raising my vibration and listening to frequency. That's it, you know, and it has significantly changed, you know, my vibration. And, because when your vibration is high, are you guys familiar with the map of consciousness?
We are, but our audience may not be. A bunch of leaders in big business, right? So break down this whole concept of vibration for them, please.
So there's a guy named David Hawkins wrote a book, Power versus Force, and he came up with this map of consciousness. And basically, there's different levels of vibration that you carry, right? And unfortunately, you know, the people that are running the world right now they vibe at a really low vibration, right? You know, the Trudeaus and the Joe Bidens and, the Bill Gateses of the world, they vibe at a very low vibration. So when that happens, they suck us all down into that
deficit.
Yeah. And so, for me, I don't want to live there. I lived there my whole entire existence, and it's funny how, God always has a plan for your life. And somebody showed me this map of consciousness and I was like, holy cow, like this is cool. And so, I want to vibe, at that 600, 700 range, because if I'm vibing high, doesn't matter where I go on the planet, I'm bringing that vibration with me. And then I'm raising everybody else's vibration who are in my space. Right. And I love one of the experiments he did. He went to the highest crime rate city in America, which I think is outside of Baltimore. And he had people go there every day at noon and meditate. And the crime rate went down, right? Just by having people meditate. So, meditation and all that stuff is so important, especially when you're on a healing journey, because when you're doing drugs and you're drinking and you're in the addiction space, like you're vibing at, a really, really low vibration, right? So, what recovery does is it brings you out of that low vibration and gets you to a higher vibration, right? Because they say Christ vibed at the highest vibration. I think it's like 1,000 or something. And, he significantly, no matter where he went, he just raised the vibration, So, and because, there's so much evil on the planet, that's why they don't like guys like me, right? Is because I'm vibing way too high, right? I'm vibing way too high, and they don't want that, right? And when you're vibing high, all that negative energy doesn't affect you, right?
How do we get to those leaders who are vibing low, don't see that they're traumatized and super compensating by trying to have power over everybody else? How do we affect change there?
Well, that's the worst addiction to have, right? The addiction to power, right? It's an addiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they also carry the narcissistic gene too. So they're not even aware that they're vibing at a very low vibration, right? So, and unfortunately though, those psychopaths, those are the people that get in positions of power because they can manipulate, coerce, and they know how to get themselves in
strings.
Yeah. They know how to get themselves in that kind of position. And so, what's the best way to, get back in a narcissist? Ignore them, right? Laugh at them, make fun of them, right? Because that's how they connect in relationship. They connect, with negativity, right? And if you ignore them, they go crazy. They go nuts, right? Because they can't connect. They can't,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know if there's a way to
Feel that.
Yeah. That's like maybe 3-4 life journey to get rid of that, It's so significant, because they're not even aware of what they're doing, right? So
they don't see themselves.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We had Dr. Richard Schwartz on this podcast, the founder of IFS, and he actually believes that there's no bad parts and that you can heal narcissism.
Yeah, I'm sure you can, but you got to be willing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why I'm still questioning, how do you get them to be willing, right? Because when they're feeding the addiction by having all the power over, they're not going to want to give that up. You had to get to your knees and surrender, right? In order to get to that point where you would actually start to do the work. I'm just wondering, how about for the people that are somewhere in between? Because we see a lot of this, right, Rob, in the corporate space. It's just a lot of people with low self-awareness because the society we live in has basically conditioned us to be that way, right?
Right. Well, and when I was writing my second book, I discovered 4 core things that trauma teaches us that become like what we think about ourselves. So the first one is abandonment and neglect. Second one is I'm not good enough. Third one is I'm not lovable. And then the fourth one, which is our opioid, fentanyl, and heroin users, is do I even exist in the world? Right. And, we either have 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of these characteristics, depending on our experience, with trauma. And so when I discovered that, I was like, okay, I can rewire all of these beliefs. And, that's what I've been doing is, self-love, self-care, prayer, meditation, breathing, all these things, because that's what brings you back to self, right? And, let's face it, if you have a good relationship with yourself, how do you think all of your other relationships are going to be? They're going to be the same, right? But if we're walking around thinking every relationship we're in, that person's going to leave us, or, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, all these things, yeah, it's going to be difficult to be in a healthy, relationship.
That's why we, as leadership coaches, say that leadership starts with self-leadership. I don't even let my leaders work on anything that pertains to their people until they work on that.
Yeah.
Right? Because the model carries the most weight. That's the number one play in that heart-centric, human-centric leadership playbook.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, the greatest leaders, you know, have humility, and they have, you know, compassion, they have empathy. You know, they truly care about people. You know, they don't put themselves, you know, on a pedestal. You know, they have very little ego. You know, and but you know, as a leader, you know, your attitude should be, you know, I want to learn more from you than I can teach you, right? Then that takes the ego right out of it, right?
The curiosity.
Yeah, yeah. Because if my attitude is I'm better than you, then you know,
Power over.
yeah, right.
Rather
You're
than
not
awakening the
getting.
power within.
Well, if you lead with ego, eventually everybody hates your guts, right? It's very simple, right? I've seen it many times, you know, playing on teams where the coach was an egomaniac. What's going to happen? Mutiny. Mutiny is going to happen like big time, right?
True.
So, but unfortunately, you know, we sort of grew up in that military sort of leadership, right? And you know, that's how those guys led, right? Unfortunately, and I grew up in that, you know, that suck it up era, and yeah, it's been quite a journey unpacking all of that shit, you know, right?
That's why I think it's so confusing that we're still in that era so much in sports, because we know so much more. We have neuroscience now, right? And all this in terms of psychological theory.
Yeah, but those guys that are in power, they don't want to look at this stuff because they're going to become obsolete if they look at that stuff, right? So,
well, we just saw that play out in Hockey Canada locker room now, didn't we? If you could
This
say,
is the piece, right?
go ahead.
This is the piece that Theo's talking about, right? Is trauma creates these beliefs about ourselves. So I'm not good enough. I'm unlovable. I'm powerless. I'm, you know, not accepted. And then we go out in the world with these protector parts that are working really hard to prevent us from feeling in those ways. And then we learn leadership through sports, through school, even school, right? It's like, well, I sit at the front, I tell you all the things that are true, and you write down and listen. And then you have to put your hand up to ask a question, right?
Right.
And you have to ask me when you can go to the bathroom, right? And it's like, then we've learned leadership is this. And this is why, like, when I talk about asshole bosses a lot, there is an element of like, you learn leadership in the wrong way, and it's okay, because if you can get over that hump of like that reticence to look in the mirror, you can choose to change.
Yeah.
And it ain't easy.
Yeah.
Everyone in this room knows it's not easy, but it's possible.
Yeah. Anything's possible. You know, anything's possible. I'm living proof of that, you know. But in 12 step, they talk, you know, the word willingness is so prominent in any 12 step. You just have to be willing. That's it. And to be coachable, right? That's it. You know, take the cotton out of your ears and stick it in your mouth and sit there and listen, right? You know, nobody wants to listen to what you have to say, right? You know, and you know, we as a society, we don't listen very well because we always, you know, we want to fix everything, right? We want to fix other people's problems. Well, you can't. You can't. They have to fix themselves. And if they're not willing to do that, you know, you might as well go bang your head against the wall because, you know, they're not listening. They're not listening because they're not willing to take direction, right? And most addicts and alcoholics, like that's the fucking last thing we want to do is take direction. You know what I mean? You know, we're egomaniacs with inferiority complexes, you know, so, right?
Control freaks too, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Don't want to be controlled by nobody.
Yeah.
That's part of how they maladaptively seek safety.
Yeah. But that's a trauma response. That's all that is, right?
That's literally what I was going to say, right? It's like
Yeah.
maladaptive trauma response. If you could say one thing to this audience of leaders listening right now to inspire them to become willing participants in their healing and their growth journey, what would that be?
Get right with God. Get right with God. That's it. Surrender. Turn your will and your life over to something greater than yourself, and get out of the passenger or the driver's seat. Get in the passenger seat and let it happen. Don't force it. God has a plan. He's always had a plan. The only time the plan goes sideways is when you're in control of that plan, right? That's that I talked about it earlier, but that spiritual base is such a key component to any type of healing journey. And just for those of us, who, gone out in the world and we think we're alone in the world, when you have that spiritual base, you're never alone. You can always tap into the source at any time, right? And there's lots of different ways to do it. They say prayer is talking to God, meditation is listening to God, right? Depression is thinking about the past. Anxiety is thinking about the future. So, it's that Buddhist mentality of, being present in the moment as much as we can. But when we have trauma, that is pretty much impossible, right? So that meditation, listening to those frequencies brings you peace, inner peace, calmness, breathing, all these things. You don't need pharmaceuticals, to help you when you're struggling with some sort of mental illness, right? There's lots of other holistic things that are way better than synthetic fucking brain chemistry, you know?
It's so interesting because when Rob first walked through my door, severely depressed, I was trying to get him to meditate. I was trying to get him to practice spirituality. But do you want to share your experience with that as a heavily traumatized person? Like you couldn't be in the moment. It made your symptoms worse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And this is a common experience, right? Is like for folks who are heavily traumatized and in really, like I was basically suicidal. And I had tried 25 different medications and they had all made me worse. And it was this element of like, I can't sit with myself because of all the stuff my parts were like at war. I used to tell Susan every day, I'm in a war today.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all just banging their heads against each other. And you're right, though, is like for me, the unlock was deep trauma therapy and ketamine and finding the right support system like Susan and really like radically transforming my life. And now I have those moments of peace where I
Yeah.
can just meditate.
Think about one thing at a time,
Yeah.
right? You know, yeah, it's a journey. Um, I wasn't, believe me, I wasn't a meditator at all, but I knew that, the people that were telling me these kind of things, like they had peace, they had serenity, they had joy. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do this until I get it because I know that it's, you know what I mean? Um, yeah, it was difficult at the beginning. And some days it is difficult, right? It's just the way that, we're made up. And, but, you know, um, we just keep trying it, keep doing it, there's lots of 5-minute meditations that, are really, really good, when you're first starting out on this journey. Yeah. But to me, the frequency stuff has been really the coolest thing because we listen to music, right? We listen to music and frequency is, pretty much the same, you know, and, for every ailment, there's a frequency that can help you get out of whatever you need to get out of, And that's been the coolest for me is, when I'm depressed or I'm anxious or whatever, I know that I can go into my YouTube app and find whatever frequency I need in the moment to, get me out of that, get me from, you know, getting in that trauma loop and just going around and around and around and around and around, right? I can go in and I can stop that, right?
Interrupt the pattern.
Yeah. hmm Which then creates new neural paths, which creates, all this awesome stuff, like, the brain is such a, magnificent organ, that you can change it. It's cool, right?
Yeah, it's right where we started talking about it, like the gym, right? And conditioning our muscles. That's why we
Yeah.
call our work getting in the mental gym, because that's
Yeah.
exactly what it is. You just got to make that 5-minute commitment a day, and that compound effect will change your life. Theo, what do you want the legacy of all this incredibly important work that you're doing in the world, raising the awareness and the frequencies in and around trauma to be
Yeah.
someday?
Well, when I'm out traveling around, this country, all I see is pain and suffering, right? And, so the big goal is to alleviate, pain and suffering on the planet because I believe it's unnecessary. I believe it's totally fixable. You have three people on, on this call, who are living proof that, you can definitely change that, right? So, yeah, and my biggest fear was being alone, right? My biggest fear was being alone, and I've overcome that because I've been able to have a relationship with myself and see all the amazing qualities that I have, and the wonderful person I am, the compassionate person I am, the empathetic person I am. I sort of bought into a narrative a long time ago that I was just, I was this and I could never be this. You know what I mean? And, that's been, flipped around. Um, and those of us who've experienced trauma, like we're the healers on the planet. Like that's our role. That's what God wants us to do, is he wants us to heal as many people as we possibly can. That's why he gave us the trauma in the first place, right? There's gifts in pain and suffering, you know, and the greatest motivator for change is pain, right?
Amen.
And so when you embrace it, acknowledge it, and then reach out and say, hey, I need help, right? Doesn't mean you're weak. It actually means you're courageous. It means you care about yourself, right? But so many people just get stuck in, this is who I'm supposed to be, right? And that's why we called the book what we called the book, Conversations with a Rattlesnake. Well, the rattlesnake is not a combative animal. It just wants to be alone. Like, leave me alone. But what it does is it sheds its skin, transforms itself, and reinvents itself all the time. And that's us, right? Um, you know, if you don't think you can do anything, then you're not, right? But if you think you can change and you think you can reinvent yourself, go for it, right? I don't know how many times I've reinvented myself in the last since I left the game of hockey. And it was mostly out of necessity because all I had was a grade 12 diploma from Vanier Collegiate in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan when I retired. And I had more than half my life left to live, and I had no idea what the rest of my life was going to look like. So I had to, reinvent myself over and over and over again. And, I found my little niche, and, it's been great.
Love it.
Amazing. What an incredible journey. And for folks out there, so if you want to connect with Theo, you can check out his website, theofleury.life. I've also dropped his LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter in the podcast notes. And then obviously head on over to Amazon and pick up his books, Playing with Fire and Conversations with a Rattlesnake. And wherever you're listening to the LLP show, just search We're a Little Crazy and hit subscribe to the show there as well. Theo, is there anything or anywhere else folks should find you or check out?
I think you covered it all. But I always say whenever I'm on a podcast that, if you're out there and you've listened to this and you're struggling and you're feeling alone, just reach out to me on social media. I guarantee I'll get back to you within a half hour. And because you don't need to be alone in your pain and suffering, right? There's always somebody out there who's willing to help. And but you need to take the initiative.
Amazing.
Because the whole entire planet, we all need help. We've all experienced trauma. And, a lady in one of my workshops one day, she stood up and she said, trauma is the string which binds us all together as human beings. And I was like, that's the greatest statement I've ever heard in my life. And it's so true because, really at the end of the day. And, don't look at your trauma as being a burden. Look at it as, because my trauma is my superpower now, right? It's my superpower. And, trauma, trauma is like adversity, right? And when you have adversity, what does it do? It builds resilience. And then once you have resilience, then it's like, bring it on. I'll figure it out. There's nothing I can't overcome once I have resilience, right? And so, I look at all of those traumatic experiences in my life now, I see them as gifts, not as burdens, because if I didn't have that experience, guess what? I'm not talking to you guys today. So there's something good that came out of something negative, right? And that's how we have to look, at our trauma is, there's a reason why this stuff happens is because somewhere down the road, when you find the courage and the strength to tell your story, somebody's going to relate to what you're talking about. And then that creates conversation. And then that conversation creates relationship. And then boom, you two are on this amazing healing journey together, which is what coaching is all about. Right?
Amen.
That's what it's all about,
Well said.
I love it. Obviously, for folks out there, for all things leadership coaching, mindset coaching, and more, head on over to elitehighperformance.com and also hit subscribe to Leadership Launchpad Project on your favorite podcast platform. Susan, I ran out of breath there. Susan,
That's a lot.
where do you want to leave folks with today?
Well, as an empath who sometimes struggles with how heavy things are in our world right now and how much pain and suffering I not only see but feel, I just found this conversation to be so freaking empowering. Rob and I share in this core belief, which is why we're yin and yang leading this podcast, right? Adversity is just the opportunity for growth, just dressed up and disguised as adversity. And we really made the case for how that pain is the starting point for finding those opportunities for growth. Yeah. So, I'm so pumped up because I feel like this is the message our leaders need to hear more than ever so that they actually can help us spread this ripple effect.
For sure.
Thank you, Theo. Yeah,
no problem. Well, there was a reason why I was successful in my hockey career. I was meant to do what I was meant to do, but more importantly, all those experiences, being around great leaders, like Gretzky and, Messier and Lemieux and Sakic and Eiserman, though I was able to be in their presence and I was able to observe, what great leadership was. And I've taken what I've learned from those guys and I've just put it into what I'm doing today. That's all, so, very blessed, very blessed.
Pain into purpose, baby. How
Oh, yeah.
inspiring! How inspiring is that?
Absolutely. Yep. That's how you do it. Right.
That's what the greatest leaders understand. All those guys you just mentioned, right? They understood how to turn that into the greatest form of motivation that ever lived in our game of hockey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And all those guys weren't successful out of the gate. They had to learn. There was many devastating losses that happened along the way for them to get to greatness, right? And you learn more from getting knocked down than you do. Winning's easy. Like seriously, it really is. It's losing that's hard, and those lessons, are difficult.
Feedback, not failure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
we'll have to have you back again for part 2 because clearly we could do this all damn day, but we got to land this plane now, right, Robert?
Absolutely. Yeah. And for me, I just want to land this plane similarly to where we kind of talked about and where Theo landed, which was that his struggles were his gift. And for me, that was something that Susan helped me see that gave me purpose and meaning that I didn't feel like I had before. And for folks out there, it's exactly what Theo said, is the resiliency to keep getting up and searching and keep doing the work and to lean in when it's hard, because some of it is hard. But there will be a moment where it all coalesces for you and things will change, and they'll change really fast.
Yeah. The light bulb. The light bulb moments. Love them.
Greatest pivot of our lives.
Yeah. So keep walking the walk, keep going on your journey. Theo, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on this show, and you're doing amazing work, and it's incredible to see.
Thank you. Thanks. And I always appreciate, any opportunity I get to, share my story, mine's a little bit on the extreme side. You don't have to go where I went, but even though I did go to the nth degree, I made it back, and now I'm making a difference, and that's what life's all about, is taking all that pain and all that struggle and turning it into something wonderful, right?
Yeah, I don't believe in useless suffering.
No, God, no. I had too much of that.
Yeah, amen.
Yeah, awesome.
All right.
Thank you so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed this one, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye, everyone.
I'm trying to hit stop.